welcome to a new edition of It's Easy Being Green. I'm Nathan Ryder. Thanks for joining us. It's a blizzard outside right now, just 2 weeks before Christmas, but inside the kitchen we're trying to make it feel a little bit more like summer. It was a bumper harvest of tomatoes out in the garden this year. We had a lot that were still green when it came time for the final pick in the fall before the frost. So we've been ripening those tomatoes over the last few weeks, and I actually posted an article about that on the site. So if you haven't read how to ripen green tomatoes inside your house for the winter, you might want to check that one out. I'll include a link to that at the end of this post. Now, you can see that we have 3 huge pots of tomatoes. So what to do with all those at once? Well, we thought, how about make some pasta sauce? It's homemade, it's simple, and it's a taste of summer that can last you all through the winter season. The ingredients itself are very simple. All you need is tomatoes. Like we said, we have these 3 baskets of these wonderful little tomatoes here. You're also going to need some lemon juice. That's very important because in the chemistry of canning and processing your own tomato sauce, you need that lemon juice to bring up the acidity level. And then you're also going to need some salt. Add to that a few dried herbs, however you like to flavor your pasta sauce, and that's all you need for the ingredients. Now let's check out the equipment. Now the equipment that you're going to need to process the sauce is pretty simple. First you want to start with a water bath canner. This is just a good old-fashioned steel enamel pot that you can use. It's got a water bath canning rack inside of it. Then you're also going to want a jar filler funnel. This makes filling the jars a whole lot easier. Creates less of a mess, which is always good. You're going to want to get a pair of jar tongs so you can pull the jars in and out of the boiling water easily without scalding yourself. Good old-fashioned ball mason jars or any other type of canning jar. These ones we bought $7 for a case, so it was a fairly cheap, good deal. You're also going to want a ladle, cutting board, a good knife, and a blender. To get started, you first want to fill your water bath canner with water. You want to make sure that you fill up the water bath canner almost all the way to the top, at least far enough for you to be able to immerse the jars in it later and completely cover their lids. So once the pot is full of water, put it back on the stove, and let's kick up the heat to high. While our water bath canner is heating up, which will take quite a while because we've got to get it to a rolling boil, we'll go ahead and start the process of washing the tomatoes, cutting them, and coring them. Give the tomatoes a good rinse to wash off any bugs, dirt, or debris that you might have brought in with them. After you wash and rinse your tomatoes, next up is to take the stems out, which you do just by plucking. Sometimes it's easier said than done. I guess this one, we'll just go ahead and cut it out. So put it on your board, you can just go ahead and cut the top off. That's one way to do it, and then you can cut the core out. Or if that seems like too much work for you, you can just take your tomato and go ahead and cut the core without slicing the top off. It's kind of up to you, whatever your technique wants to be. I prefer just to cut the core out. And then you want to go ahead and first cut the tomato in half, and then cut it in half again so you're quartering them, and then throw your quarters into a bowl, and then we'll eventually transfer that into the stock pot. Now as you're cutting your tomatoes, you want to be on the lookout for any blemishes or bad spots. It could be a sign of disease or possibly an insect that got inside, or even some mold that might be growing in the tomato. Like this is a classic example. This one's probably a little far gone at this point, so we won't even attempt to cut that one. But if you see a weird spot or the tomato seems squishy, cut it open, see what's inside. Give it the old whiff test. Homestead Hottie likes to do that. And it is true, the nose knows. If it smells bad or off, you don't want to chance it. See, this is another yucky one. You'll encounter this. It's okay. Just move on.
Now your red ripe tomato. Don't forget your T-bone steak. When you get ready, go to fishing.
It's good not to include any bad spots because they could end up spoiling your sauce. And you don't want to do that. Okay, so we've got about 6 quarts of quartered tomatoes ready to go here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to bring them over And then you want to put a shallow layer of tomatoes inside your baking pan. So I'm going to scoop some of these in here. Alright, once you get a good layer of those inside your stock pot, you're going to go ahead and kick up the heat to about medium-high, and you're going to start cooking them down until they boil. Once they boil, we're going to crush those, make more room, and then start adding several more layers of tomatoes throughout the process. So our first layer of tomatoes has come to a boil, so what we want to do is crush it down so that the skins collapse and that things really start cooking along. I just use what is this thing? It's like a skimmer that I use to cook things in the wok when I'm cooking stir fry. You can also use a potato masher or something along those lines, but basically just start crushing the tomatoes. This is going to help release the juices and squish them down and get the skin squished down, because you're going to start creating the sauce. Now after we squish these all down and get them covered with their own liquid, the tomato juice, we're going to go ahead and add in another layer of tomatoes. And basically you just keep doing this, maintaining the boil all the way through the process because you don't want it to get cold. So I'm going to dump in another layer. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's about another 2 quarts of quartered tomatoes that have gone in. So it'll take it probably another 10 to 15 minutes for these to get back up to temperature so the boil is up to the top. And then you just do that whole process again. Go ahead, squish them down, get the skin squished, get the juices out, and then you add in another layer. And we're going to keep going like this until the pot is completely full. And then we'll move on to the next step, and that's making your sauce. Tomatoes have been cooking in the pot for probably about 2 hours now as we've slowly added those layers in, and you can see that they've pretty much fully broken down. The skins have come off of them, and they're kind of turning into this nice tomato mush. So now that the sauce is completely boiling, it's time to put this through the blender, make it smoother, and then we're going to put it back in the pot and bring it back to a boil until we get all the water out. We blended our last little bit of tomatoes and we're pouring those back in the pot. So we have our full pot of tomatoes that have been blended down to a smooth consistency back in. I'm now going to bring this back up to a boil, and this is the point if you want to add in any dried herbs like basil or oregano, you want to get them in now so that they'll go through the process of boiling. That'll help sterilize them and help impart the flavor all the way through your pasta sauce. It shouldn't take too much longer to get this back up to a boil because, well, it was already boiling when we put it through the blender. And at this point, we'll get our jars ready. While you're waiting for the pasta sauce to thicken, begin sterilizing your jars in the water bath canner. First, remove the lids and bands and submerge the jars in the boiling water. When the sauce has reached your desired thickness and your jars are hot, you can begin using the tongs to pluck out the jars and drain them and get them ready to can. Before filling each jar with pasta sauce, make sure to measure out 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and a teaspoon of salt. Then you can start filling.
Red rice tomato. Don't forget your T-bone steak.
Begin filling the jars with the hot pasta sauce and leave a 1/4 inch of headspace or open space at the top of the jar. Jiggle out any trapped air bubbles and then wipe the rim of the jar clean. To seal the jars, pull out a lid and a band from boiling water. Put the lid on and then put the band on and tighten to finger tight. Now that the jars are filled and sealed, they're ready to go into the water bath canner. Just submerge them fully, make sure they're fully covered with boiling water, and let them go for 40 minutes. Once they're done, pull them out, let them cool on the counter overnight, and you have your own homemade pasta sauce.
Red rice tomato. Don't forget your T-bone steak. Your red rice tomato. Don't forget your T-bone steak.